This is a massive review over Module 3, and this is what you guys took a test over last week, and I told you would be retaking that test this week. So on the first top part, you've got numbers 1 through 6, and it says classify the following numbers by placing a check mark in each box that describes the number given. And then over on the right side, I've drawn a Venn diagram. So you've got your whole numbers, which is just a positive whole number, no fractions, no decimals. You've got integers, which is the next string, which is what I like to call the negative whole numbers. So it's a negative number, but it's still not a fraction or a decimal. And then you've got your rational numbers, which is where fractions and decimals are introduced. So if you wanted to give an example of each, an example of a whole number could be 5, an integer, -5, because it's a negative whole number. And then rational numbers, you could do like -1/5, because it's negative, but it's a fraction, so it would only be rational. Let's go classify. So on number 1, you have -9. That would be what I like to call a negative whole number. So it's an integer. That's where it comes into play. And if it's an integer, then it's also a rational number. You have 2.2. That's a decimal. Decimals are only rational numbers. You have -6.2. And so even though that is negative, it's still a decimal, so it would just be rational. 5/8, that's a fraction, so it's just a rational number. -7/8, it's a fraction, so rational. And then also you have 30. 30 is a whole number, which means it's also an integer, and it's also a rational number. Hi guys, it's Kalea. Jump down to number 7. It says graph the following rational numbers on a number line below with a dot. So you've got whole numbers, you've got negative whole numbers, you've got fractions, and you've got decimals you have to graph. So once we get to the fractions, I'm going to change them into decimals because I think it's a lot easier to graph a decimal than it is a fraction. But we'll get there when we get there. So on the first one, it just says to graph -2. So find -2 on this number line and put a dot. This number line is pretty easy because it labels every 0.2. So it's easy to know where to graph your decimals at, whereas if you look at the one below it, it's a little bit more spaced out. The next one, so +1.5. Make sure you're in the positives. You have +1.4 and +1.6, so it's going to go directly in between the two. -1.3. So -1.2 and -1.4, it's going to go in between the two again. And all of a sudden you have 2 4/5. So I'm going to use a calculator, and you can use a calculator as well. You're going to have to take the top of the fraction and divide it by the bottom of the fraction. So in this case, it's going to be 4 divided by 5, which is 0.8. Don't forget about the whole number, so what I'm going to graph is 2.8. And now all of a sudden we took a fraction and made it into something very easy to graph because 2.8 is even clearly labeled for us. It's right here. -2 3/5, so I need my calculator again. I'm going to clear it. I got to take 3 and divide it by 5. That's giving me 0.6, so -2.6, which is also clearly labeled on the graph. Find the -2's. -2.6 is right here. 0.2, that is in the positives. It's right here. And then 1 1/5. So it's a fraction again. Clear out my calculator. 1 divided by 5, 0.2. So I need to graph that at +1.2, which is right here. And then the last one is -1.5. So halfway between -4 or 1.4 and -1.6. So I'm going to stop there on those. You need to do number 8 on your own. Okay, so since you're doing number 8 on your own, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to do number 9 with you guys, and then you're actually going to finish it. So it says order the following sets of rational numbers from least to greatest by placing a 1, 2, or a 3 on the line above the numbers. And then I ask you to use a calculator to change those fractions into decimals. So number 9, the first one says 2 3/10. So pull my calculator back up. 3, remember you divide the top of the fraction by the bottom. So 3 divided by 10 is 0.3. So when I'm ordering these, I need to think of it as 2. Oh, that is huge. Hang on. Okay, that's a little better. 2.3. -2 is, it's already a negative whole number. I don't need to change that to anything. And then I have 2 10/25, which is an unsimplified fraction, but that's okay. Just take 10 and divide it by 25, and you get 0.4. So I'm going to think of that as positive 2.4. If it's a negative fraction like over here, then you need to make sure that the negative carries with it, but those were all positive. So now order them from least to greatest. I have positive 2.3, negative 2, and positive 2.4. So the negative is clearly going to be the least, so I'm going to put a 1 above it. And then if I'm going in order from least to greatest, this would come second, and this would come third. So listen carefully. What you are responsible for doing is number 8, the graphing on the number line. And then I need you to do numbers 10, 11, and 12, so basically the rest of this front side. And then if you flip it over, you have a word search on the back. There's a word bank on the bottom. You put the vocabulary word in the boxes, or on the lines, and then you find the word above. Once you finish with all of this, you guys can come to me and I'm going to give you the QR code so that you can scan and check your answers. Remember, I want these turned into me. That way I can give them back to you on Thursday when you retake your guys' quizzes. If you have any questions, ask me, please.